We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Monday edition of Point of View. First of all, happy St. Patrick's Day. No, I'm not wearing green, but many others are as well. Didn't think it looked that good on camera for those of you that even take the time to watch the program, but certainly I hope you had a great weekend. A shout out to those of you that will maybe be following March Madness, and we're going to be spending some time in just a few minutes talking with Reggie Littlejohn as soon as she can make her way into the studio. She is the founder and president of Women's Rights Without Foundations and Frontiers, I should say, and probably best known for her Save a Girl campaign, and really focused a lot of time and attention on China. Then began to notice with first the pandemic, the lockdown, the digital surveillance taking place in China, launched another organization, the Anti-Globalist International. So we'll talk about China. We will have quite a bit of conversation about China this week. For those of you watching online, I'll hold up our March issue, which is on China, but also we'll be talking, especially on Wednesday, about two books. The one by Senator Tom Cotton, 7 Things You Can't Say About China. Also Plan Red, which came from our good friend Gordon Chan. So we'll get into some of that on China later. We might mention a little bit today when Reggie Littlejohn shows up, but I just think it would be good for you to know that coming down the pike, and we'll get into some of those issues as well. Let me, since we have a few minutes before we get to her, a chance to pick up on a few issues that surfaced on Friday that we didn't necessarily go into in some detail. One of those is the Joe Biden auto pen. Now, first of all, I was shocked to think, because after all, it doesn't take that much to sign an executive order or to sign a bill. That's what every president has done. And then I find out, oh no, Barack Obama used an auto pen as well. But I think most of us recognize that President Obama really had his mental faculties. There's real questions as to whether or not President Biden had all of his. And so apparently there is now some evidence suggesting that these various pardons were signed by an auto pen. Those would, for example, be the auto pen signing on January 19th. That would be the Biden family members. That would be Anthony Fauci. That would be General Milley. That would be the members of the J6 committee and some others. And so that is of real concern. You've already heard President Trump suggesting that indeed that might invalidate some of those pardons. And if that's the case, let's go back to December 30th, in which we had the pardoning of 6 criminals. And that for sure was done by the auto pen. One, because the signatures look the same. And second of all, because we know that President Joe Biden was vacationing and golfing in the U.S. Virgin Islands. So those are a couple of issues that I think going to be kind of very significant. And again, one of the things that we brought up before is that the auto pen was making the signatures, but now we have a key aide to former President Joe Biden saying that indeed he may have exceeded their authority because they were allowing 2 individuals, at least, 2 sources saying, at least one individual, but I think it's more than that, actually allow the documents to be robotically signed rather than signed by 82-year-old Joe Biden. So one of those issues that has become more than just a little bit of an issue, it's become a big issue. But we're now joined in studio with a good friend, Reggie Littlejohn. Reggie Littlejohn has been with us many times before. Of course, she's known for the Women's Rights for Frontiers, but of course, as I mentioned just a minute ago, started the Anti-Globalist International. So Reggie, good to see you today.
It's great to see you, Kerby. It's a pleasure to be here in studio.
I was thinking how long it's been since we've known each other, because you go back talk at least 2 studios, I think.
I think so.
And so that gets at least 10 years, maybe even closer to 15. But nevertheless, let's talk about your pilgrimage, because I did, before you came, talk about the fact that you've been known for years talking about the one-child policy in China. But then I began to, since I get your newsletters, notice more and more of your concern about the pandemic, about this idea of DIDs, digital IDs, CBDC, central bank digital currencies, and all sorts of other things. And so as a result, you started this anti-globalist international organization. Tell us more.
Well, that is correct. So I did start out as an attorney, and I represented Chinese refugees in their cases for political asylum, people who'd been injured by the victims of the one-child policy. And from there, started saving baby girls in China who were possible victims or threatened by sex-selective abortion, and then widows. And then when the pandemic hit, I saw the tactics of the Chinese Communist Party, and even the information from the disinformation from the Chinese Communist Party being repeated by the World Health Organization, and co-founded the Sovereignty Coalition, and we have been raising the awareness of all the horrific things that are happening with the World Health Organization and the United Nations. And then now that President Trump withdrew us from the World Health Organization, I am trying to get the entire world, or I'm trying to get the world out of the World Health Organization. That's Anti-Globalist International, and also the United Nations. There are very, very horrific globalist things that both of those organizations are doing.
Let's see if we can talk about the World Health Organization, because I've touched on it a little bit, and then we were going to get Michelle Bachmann on, but then I knew, well, you can speak to that better than anybody. I've seen you on various talk shows, and of course, it has been something that we've been talking about for some time. The World Health Organization is not helping us. It has a pandemic plan that is really very scary. And so tell us about why that's become such an issue and why you're so grateful that Donald Trump has actually removed us.
Yes, thank God that Donald Trump has removed us, although I have to tell you, it takes a year to get out. So it's going to be a year from his inauguration date in January 2026 that we're actually going to be able to be out. But here's what he has saved us from, okay, but also here's what we need to save the world from. All right. So there's the agreement, the International Health Regulation Amendments. What those did, and those passed in May of 2024, they established what I would call a biotech surveillance police state. They require all nations, and if the United States were still in the World Health Organization, we'd be required to surveil all our citizens, censor them from misinformation and disinformation, which is basically anything that the World Health Organization disagrees with, which is ridiculous. I mean, in the beginning, the World Health Organization was parroting the Chinese line that there was no human-to-human transmission. And if somebody said, no, there is human-to-human transmission, that would be misinformation and disinformation, and they would be silenced. So they say follow the science, but actually the plan of the World Health Organization to silence all dissent kills science. It doesn't follow science. And then they have a provision, an annex to that agreement, which requires basically everybody in the world to have a health ID. So it can be paper in the case of countries that can't do a digital ID, or a digital ID for countries that can. And these digital IDs are what made me turn my attention towards this, because they can serve as the platform for the China social credit system coming to the United States and to the world.
Let's take a break. When we come back, of course, we're going to talk about globalism and surveillance and the Great Reset and all sorts of issues that she talks about all the time. And, of course, we've provided booklets on that regard as well. Might also encourage you to go to the website, because we have a very good article that actually summarizes China's surveillance and censorship. And we're going to talk about the dangers of artificial intelligence. We're going to try to pack all that in a half an hour. We'll do our best. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Earlier this month, President Trump signed an executive order that establishes a strategic Bitcoin reserve. It will capitalize the Bitcoin already owned by the Department of Treasury that was taken from criminal or civil asset forfeiture proceedings. It will not sell any Bitcoin, and the Secretaries of Treasury and Commerce have been given the task of developing budget-neutral strategies for acquiring more. At the same time, the executive order also establishes a digital asset stockpile that would consist of other digital assets owned by the Department of Treasury. There are no plans to acquire any more, and likely those will be sold off. As you might imagine, there are proponents and opponents to the strategic Bitcoin reserve. Many members of Trump's cabinet are proponents of Bitcoin and have Bitcoin within their financial portfolios. The executive order reminds voters of the pledge by candidate Trump to make the U.S. the crypto capital of the world. The opponents can be divided into two groups. One group opposes a Bitcoin strategic reserve because they believe it won't work. I first discussed Bitcoin on radio in 2017, and for the last 8 years I've read and heard what is often called FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. We'll no doubt hear all those erroneous claims once again. The opponents are those who believe the strategic reserve will work and don't want to reward bad behavior. This asset, with a fixed supply of 21 million coins, will increase in value and can be used to offset our current and future national debt. The debt came from politicians who ran up massive deficits and the Federal Reserve that printed the money to fund this fiscal irresponsibility. Some people in the past feared the government might ban Bitcoin. Instead, the government will be acquiring Bitcoin. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view of genetic engineering, go to viewpoints.info/genetic engineering. Viewpoints.info/genetic engineering. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have us in studio for just a few more minutes. Reggie Littlejohn, she's going to have to head on to another activity in about a half an hour, but we are going to certainly get all the information we can from her as quickly as possible. Let me just mention that we also, in addition to all the material we make available, my Viewpoints commentary, many of you just heard a minute ago, we have a take action item. This one, tell House Republicans no taxpayer funding for abortion, because as we pointed out, an executive order could be reversed by the next president. One of the ones I want to post, and this gets back to Reggie Littlejohn, is Representative Andy Biggs has actually created a World Health Organization Withdrawal Act. So it's one thing for President Trump to withdraw the United States from the World Health Organization. It'd be quite another to actually have a law that does that. So that's one of the things in the material we're providing for you today.
That's exactly right, Kerby. So when President Trump withdrew us from the World Health Organization in his first term, President Biden just put us right back because it was done by executive order.
Right.
So an executive order from one president could just be reversed by another president. So what Andy Biggs' bill would do is make it a law withdrawing us from our when we originally became members of the World Health Organization to reverse that and to make it a law that could not be reversed by another president without the consent of Congress. So I would urge everybody to go to Sovereignty Coalition there to take that action item, or just call your senators, call your congressman, and say, you know, we agree with the Andy Biggs bill. So please support that.
And we'll probably put it up there. It's on the third page of the material we put out there. It's the first article, which says China surveillance and censorship, Reggie Littlejohn. We were talking about the World Health Organization. You have the pandemic element, but there's another element in the World Health Organization we need to know about, and then we need to get to the United Nations. So a lot to cover.
Right. So I had spoken about the International Health Regulation Amendments establishing censorship, surveillance, and these digital IDs. Then there's a pandemic treaty that is coming up in May of this year, And the final draft has not been completed yet, but what they have is something called One Health, which basically equates human health with plant health, with the environment, human, animal, and plant, and not giving humans priority.
Yeah, you're just like another piece of grass almost, isn't it? It's just exactly. Amazing. Go ahead.
Right,
yeah.
right. And then another thing it does is it will establish something called the PAB system, Pathogen Access and Benefit Sharing System, where they are attempting to encourage countries to find pathogens with pandemic potential, PPPs, and give them to the WHO. The WHO then will farm out these pathogens with pandemic potential to labs all over the world so that they can develop vaccines. What could possibly go wrong? So what this does is it gives a chance for all these different labs to leak. To the extent that the last pandemic was from a lab leak, we are greatly increasing the chances of lab leaks. And what that does is it will greatly enrich big pharma with the vaccines that are going to be generated as a result of these pandemics, and then also it will give governments the ongoing excuse to lock us down and to deprive us of our constitutional rights. So it's really important for the world to reject the pandemic treaty. The United States is out, but the rest of the world needs to do this as well.
One of the things I did post there is for people to read, where you say this is a way of dehumanizing people so that your life, my life, is not worth any more than a bush in our backyard. And then the other one here about the idea of pathogens that can leap from animals to humans. Oh my gosh, that's happened before, and it could happen again. And you also pointed out that could be a pretext for land grabs. So again, it's amazing when you start with one premise, it leads like spokes on a wheel out in all sorts of places you wouldn't have anticipated.
Well, the way that that can be done is, let's say, for example, the Chinese government and then the World Health Organization were saying this pandemic, the COVID-19 sprang from a bat, all right? So they actually haven't. This is unbelievable. You can look it up online. They have something called Bat One Health, where there are scientists all over the world that are studying the interface between bats and human beings. Now, bats are common almost all over the world. I mean, not in the Arctic or the Antarctic, but so the idea is that we got to separate bats from humans so that this never happens again. Of course, we don't think it happened anyway. We think it was a lab leak. But what this does is a pretext for governments to get humans out of the wilderness, get humans out of the rural areas, and concentrate us all in cities, thereby grabbing the land.
It's just amazing. Well, and again, we've talked all about the World Health Organization, but you also are very concerned about the surveillance that's being proposed through the United Nations and things of that nature. And if you want to get a sense of what this could look like, go back to China, where you've been many times before.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you want to see what the future is, according to the World Health Organization and the United Nations, just look at China. That's what they would like to see for all of us, I believe. So the United Nations, there was a thing called the Pact for the Future that passed on September 22nd of 2024, and no one knew about it. There was so much publicity about the World Health Organization and almost nothing for the United Nations, but they're both equally dangerous. So the World Health Organization, they will establish a biotech surveillance state on the basis of a pandemic, and the United Nations will do the same thing on the basis of climate change and other things. So part of this Pact for the Future what is something called an emergency platform to deal with what they call complex global shocks. And there's a chart there on their website of complex global shocks, and those complex global shocks would include climate change, pandemic, the grid going down, the internet going down, the banking system going down, supply chain disruptions, a major event in outer space that's actually listed, and then what they call a black swan event, meaning something, whatever they didn't think of. And so if the Secretary General of the United Nations decides that one of these is a complex global shock, then this emergency platform will operationalize automatically, meaning that they don't have to go back to the United States or to any other nation and say, look, we have this issue, the grid went down, what do we do? Let's collaborate. They can just start directing it.
Yes.
And so this is a major violation of our sovereignty as a nation.
You know, one of the things that's so concerning is this totalitarian temptation, which we've seen in China. Of course, I understand it's in North Korea and all sorts of other places. We're even seeing it in Europe a little bit later. I'm going to talk about the fact that Europe right now is saying, you know, we need to take maybe some of the unused savings accounts of individuals so that we can use that to fight the war in Ukraine. And it's this mindset, and the World Economic Forum, every year we have individuals, at least in the Biden administration, that went over there every year talking about that. And so that's in Davos, Switzerland. So what started sort of as a totalitarian regime in Russia and China sort of spread all over the country, hasn't it? And all over the world?
The World Economic Forum is just, in my opinion, it's just an evil organization. So these digital IDs that I mentioned to you from the World Health Organization, they are now being rolled out. I mean, they have been rolled out since, I think, June of 2023 all over the world. International interoperable digital IDs. And the pretext for them is if we have another pandemic, you know, it could be a very virulent virus, and then we're going to need to be able to keep track of everybody's, you know, health and whether they're vaccinated and whether they're sick or whether they're well. Okay, so what that does is that establishes the infrastructure of a universal, interoperable, international digital ID, but you have to go over to the World Economic Forum website to see what the true purpose of this is. So you're going to need one of these to access healthcare, to have insurance, to open a bank account, to pay for online transactions, to travel even locally, like taking a bus, to own a communications device like a cell phone or a laptop, to have a social media account, to pay your taxes, to vote, to access government services like Medicare and Medicaid. So, in other words, your entire life is going to be regulated by this digital ID. And in China, what they do is if you step out of, if you step out of line, like if you criticize the government, they'll just they'll shut you down. They'll shut you off of your credit card and your bank account.
You can't even get on a train.
Right.
Yeah.
You can't even get on a bus in China if your digital ID shows that you have a low score. And that infrastructure is being laid worldwide by the World Health Organization right now as we speak.
Going to take a break, and when we come back, we have Reggie Littlejohn with us. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. You might want to just sit down and take some notes. We do have a link to her website. We also have this article that is kind of a brief summary of some of this, and we haven't even talked about artificial intelligence yet. Larry Ellison and what he wants to do there in terms of surveillance. So certainly we'll have some more things to cover. But again, if you find yourself saying, I have never heard any of this before. Also, when we come back, we might mention that the reason you're here is you were speaking at First Baptist, so other people around the country could schedule you to speak as well. So we're going to talk about how they can do that and how you can contact her. We'll be back right after this.
At Point of View, we believe there is power in prayer. And that is why we have relaunched our Pray for America campaign, a series of weekly emails to unite Americans in prayer for our nation. Imagine if hundreds of thousands of Americans started praying intentionally together on a weekly basis. You can help make that a reality by subscribing to our Pray for America emails. Just go to pointofview.net and click on the Pray for America banner that's right there on the homepage. Each week you'll receive a brief news update, a specific prayer guide, and a free resource to equip you in further action. We encourage you to not only pray with us each week, but to share these prayers and the resources with others in your life. Join the movement today. Visit pointofview.net and click on the banner Pray for America right there at the top. That's pointofview.net. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in our land. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like some more information, maybe this is coming a little fast and furious. The first article is actually one that we had received from some of the PR material, and it's entitled, Can President Trump Protect U.S. Privacy Rights and Sovereignty Against Globalists at the World Health Organization at Threats at Home? And of course, we've talked about the World Health Organization, international health regulations, the pandemic treaty. We also talked about some of these other issues as well. But I thought there's one other topic that we do need to address, and that is surveillance. And there is a whole network of cameras. Matter of fact, I've heard half of the video cameras in the world are in China, but they're all over the place. And you go everywhere and you see cameras. So first of all, we have cameras. Then you have the opportunity for AI or other kind of technology to do visual recognition and facial recognition and the rest. And so then something else I've learned, and we'll probably put this in a future commentary, Larry Ellison, who's, of course, known for some of the work he's done with Oracle, is saying now we need AI to maybe develop individualized mRNA vaccines, which I think would be a disaster. And then also, of course, just with all the AI, we have the ability for artificial intelligence to surveil us everywhere on this planet. Tell us more, if you might.
Well, the place where Larry Ellison said that was actually at a White House press conference about Stargate.
Yes.
So,
which is just down the road here. Yeah, one of the places they're building it right here in Texas. Yeah.
They're starting out in Texas. Yeah, Texas is like ground zero for Stargate.
Yes, ma'am.
And so the day after President Trump was inaugurated, he announced this project, which is $500 billion committed to building massive campuses of data centers all over the country, starting in Texas. And the people that he brought out to announce this were Larry Ellison of Oracle, Sam Altman of OpenAI, and Masayoshi Son of SoftBank. And Larry Ellison, when he was talking about this, Trump said to him, "What is this going to do? What is the most exciting thing that this is going to do?" And Larry said, "Well, we need this in order to detect cancer early in the blood, and then to develop an mRNA vaccine that is personal to that cancer." And Dr. Robert Malone, who developed mRNA, very shortly thereafter, like the next day or a couple of days later, said that is grossly naive, that can't be done. So you wonder, what is the real reason for this? And I did some digging, and I found a clip of Larry Ellison giving a talk to Oracle, I believe it was in September of 2024. Right. Where he...
Got that there.
Yes.
Where people can watch it. Yeah.
You can go watch it. And what he was talking about is his vision of the future. And he said, all of us will be wearing body cams at all times, and there will be dash cams on all the cars. There'll be surveillance cameras on the corners. There's, and ring cameras on the doors. And this will be great for society because it'll keep the police on their best behavior, because they know that everything that they do will be uploaded into AI, and it'll keep all the rest of us also on our best behavior, because we know that everything we do, everything that we say is going to be uploaded into AI. And if there's a problem, he said that they would just send out drones,
You just can't make this up.
No, you can't. But listen, here's another part you can't make up. He said this. He said
AI-operated drones. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's right. And he also said that if you need to go to the bathroom, that you can just say, "Oracle, give me a break. I need to go to the bathroom." So you have to ask Oracle's permission, to stop surveilling. And so then you can go to the bathroom for a couple of minutes. But they actually will not stop surveilling you. They will continue to surveil you. But you can't get into that particular clip unless you have a court order. Yeah. But you will always, always be under surveillance. Yeah. So this is his idea. And I wonder how much of this Stargate AI infrastructure is this going to be serving Larry Ellison's vision of what society should be looking like in the future?
You know, one of the people we have on this program is Lathan Watts, and he is the vice president of Alliance Defending Freedom, another lawyer like you. And he said, you know, the problem with some of these people is they don't realize that 1984 was written as a dystopian novel. For many of them, they think it's actually the action plan for the future. And so whether you're talking about 1984 or panopticon, where everybody is watching you all the time, again, take us back to China for just a few minutes, because that's really what happens. Because with facial recognition, with all these videos, they may not have all these AI-operated drones, but almost everything you're talking about already happens in China. And will that come here?
Right.
Is the big question.
Well, the thing is that it's even worse than China, because even in China, people are not wearing body cams.
That's right. Yeah.
No, I mean, there will be no privacy. And the thing that's really concerning about it is that this might be fine under President Trump. He promises that he's not going to abuse this power. But who knows who could be the next president? Could be Gavin Newsom, you know? Who knows what he's going to do with it? And we don't know what protections there are. They have not discussed what protections there are for, like, a different kind of government to come in and take this over. How are we going to keep these data centers from being hacked? How are we going to make sure that they aren't attacked by, terrorists or whatever else? Is this going to go worldwide? According to Larry Ellison, it's going to go worldwide. So then is China going to be having access to our information? But to take it back to China, this is like the China social credit system, where they have facial recognition, real-time geolocation. They know where you live. They know where you work. They know your criminal history is attached. Your medical history is attached. Your internet search history, your internet spending history, whether or not your gaming history online, you get lowered for that. Whether you do Xi Jinping thought every night, you get raised for that. And it's all put together into a score about how compliant of a Chinese communist sheep you are. And if you're a totally compliant person, if you follow all the laws, if you never say anything or do anything that's against the government, then you can lead a more or less free life by Chinese standards. But if you start criticizing them, then your score will go down. And so the first tier of punishment is you will lose your job. Your kid won't be able to go to a good school. You will not be able to travel. And if you keep it up, they will sever you from your bank account and your credit card. So this already happened in China when they tried to do a demonstration on there was a bank that was closing, and people wanted to get their money out, and they couldn't because this bank was closing. And so then they wanted to do a protest, and then they turned the protesters' health certificate on their phone from green to red, so that they had to go home. Not only could they not go on the train, but they had to go home and quarantine. And then if you keep it up in China, they'll just disappear you. And that infrastructure is being set up in the United States, and it's going to be run by AI. And we will have the power to do it because of all of these massive data centers. And I believe we should have a congressional hearing to hear what Larry Ellison and Sam Altman and Masayoshi Son have to say about, what kind of guardrails are they going to have in place to protect us?
Yes. Well, again, for people that say, oh, that's just over there and China won't happen here, we had a presidential candidate, Nikki Haley, that said, what we maybe should do is have everybody have a digital ID so that they can get on the internet. That way we wouldn't have any hate speech. Now, that was suggested here in the last presidential campaign by a Republican. You go to the European forums right now, European Union and all that, all the things they want to do in terms of preventing what they say misinformation, disinformation, hate speech. And you can see we've got a lot of work to do. So if people want to contact you, we have some links here. You have an even opportunity for people to sign your petition, don't they?
Well, okay, so go to antiglobalist.net. So it's antiglobalist, one word, .net. And there is a manifesto there. And if you sign that manifesto, that will give me your email address, and then I will put you on my newsletter and inform you how you can take action on all of these things. We need to do this now, because once this digital gulag is in place, there will be no more dissent, because as soon as you try to dissent, they'll just shut you down.
And I might just mention that that's the first link that we have. It's the first article, first link, takes you to the Anti-Globalist International Manifesto. Then there's a place where you can sign it. And I was looking the other day, you have 4,045 people signed it so far. And so numbers increasing and counting. So again, I know you're going to have to head on to your next event, but I would love to have you come back, especially as we know a little bit more, and we will do our best to try to have an action item for Representative Andy Biggs' World Health Organization Withdrawal Act. That's the way to solve this. Make sure it isn't just an executive order, but it's actually a part of law, right?
That would be great. Yeah, if you put the link to that and people would sign that, it will go straight to your congressmen and your senators, and maybe we can make this law and make it permanent for us to be out of the World Health Organization, and that will help me get the rest of the world out of it as well.
Reggie, thank you for being with us. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let's see if we can get into some other issues, but just for a minute, let me just mention again that our first article, I've entitled it China Surveillance and Censorship, but it has a link to Reggie Littlejohn, to the Anti-Globalist International. Of course, those of you that are interested in what has been happening in China, the one-child policy, of course, she was the founder of Women's Rights Without Frontiers, so we have that link there as well. And also, this gives you a little more information about why there's been such a concern concern about the World Health Organization. You may have some individuals saying, this is just another failed experiment by Donald Trump. He doesn't understand how important our health is. Again, how could you say that when he put Robert F. Kennedy Jr. at the Department of Health and Human Services and really wants to address some of these issues of chronic health? But the World Health Organization, as we've pointed out before, and as we were pointing out during the pandemic, has a lot of links to China and what China says oftentimes they would want to do. And so you might say, okay, let me just read a little bit more about this. You say it's of concern. Let me see if I can read that. And she talks about the fact that there are really two agreements associated with the World Health Organization that you should be concerned about. The first is the International Health Regulation. That isn't maybe as big an issue as the second one, which is called the Pandemic Treaty. Now, we were going to get Michelle Bachmann on because she's been speaking on that issue for some time, but I think you've got enough information that we've put here. We might even do a particular action item on that regard. And more importantly, as we've pointed out before, executive orders are good, but executive orders have an expiration date. And the next time you have a different president, things change again. And so even though Donald Trump recognized some of the dangers of being a member of the World Health Organization, or many of these others, the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, and many of these other groups, the bottom line is that the next president could bring us back, which is why my suggestion is, and we haven't posted it today, but we have a series of various bills in Congress that we think should be moved through Congress, first to the House, then the Senate, signed by Donald Trump, so that what was an executive order becomes the law of the land. And one of those is H.R. 54, Representative Andy Biggs' World Health Organization Withdrawal Act. So you can, of course, jump on that right away because it's on the third page of the handout that we have on our website. You can do anything you want right now, but we'll probably in the next few weeks put that one up there as one of our action items. And the other issue that she raised is we need to have hearings on, okay, we do believe that there are values and a lot of value to artificial intelligence, but when you start talking about using this vast network of cameras, and I've heard about half of these surveillance cameras are in this country of China, but still means the other half are here, and a lot of them are everywhere. And then having these cameras analyzed by AI systems, and then using AI-operated drones and having people carrying all sorts of things on their body. First of all, I think that's all going to end. But again, this isn't necessarily something that Reggie Littlejohn talks about, but let us talk about it since we obviously like to look at these things from a biblical point of view. You know as well as I do that if you read the book of Revelation, you look at the book of Daniel, you look at 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, to mention just a few places, we know of a coming Antichrist. And that doesn't necessarily mean that Larry Ellison is the Antichrist or the individuals, the World Economic Forum, are part of this revived Roman Empire. But it does, I think, illustrate again, someday in the future, there could be so much surveillance that we could not possibly imagine what that would be like. And we don't have to even look into the pages of the Bible to know what it looks like. We just simply need to see what it's like right now to live in a place like China that has access to all of this surveillance, and that is the case. Just a minute ago, you heard me mention something. You're going to say, you said something in passing. Can you document this? Well, yes, I can. The European Commission has actually estimated that they need funds to fight Ukraine, to fight in the Ukraine-Russia war, fight Russia actually, and to actually implement that. So the European Union, the other day, the European Commission estimates that there is a total of about 10 trillion euros of unused savings, and so they want to mobilize this money to finance its plans to militarize Europe and support Europe because of the concern that if Ukraine loses, then Russia might even come into Europe. So the argument is that even if you have money in a savings account, if it's just unused, we really want to borrow of it. And so you are starting to see an argument I've made many times before. You think you own things, but there's what is known as a counterparty risk. And again, she just talked about a minute ago what it's like even in China when you want to try to get your money out of a bank and you can't. Then all of a sudden you realize that that doesn't just happen in China. Go type in the word bank-run Cyprus, bank-run Turkey. You can see what's been happening in other countries. Bank-run Lebanon. Those are just a couple off the top of my head. And that certainly is the case. Also, you would say, well, they wouldn't shut down your account. And here, Jack Dorsey. Everybody know who Jack Dorsey is? Jack Dorsey started what was called Twitter. Now it's called X. And Jack Dorsey, because I have a clip here from his X account, that from X says to Jack Dorsey, quote, "We have determined that you have violated the X rules, so you'll need to wait some time before using X again. We'll unlock your account," and then it gives the amount of time. If you don't see the irony, the man who invented Twitter was just kicked off of Twitter. I don't think it lasted probably too long because Twitter is now owned by X. I'm sure that if Elon Musk heard about this, he reversed it very quickly. But does that not just illustrate to you the fact that you think you own things and you really don't? Which is one of the reasons why today you'll see my commentary on the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve. We'll talk more about that perhaps in the next hour or the next few days, but it is just, again, an understanding that really, if you own your gold coins and you actually have access to your land, maybe you have that. Although, again, you can have a company or a country come by and say, well, no, we need that land, and eminent domain takes it away from you. But there are some things that you really do own, and everything else you think you own, but sometimes you don't. And I'm pretty sure Jack Dorsey never thought that the social media platform that he created would one day kick him off of that platform, but that's the world we find ourselves in. And as I mentioned before, we'll also post this piece here because the latest is that the Joe Biden auto pen apparently has been providing pardons for individuals, and if the pardon was not actually signed by the President of the United States, I think that one goes to the Supreme Court, don't you? And that means maybe the Biden family members aren't really pardoned. Anthony Fauci isn't. Some of the members of the January 6th committee aren't. Or even the criminals that were pardoned by auto pen on December 30th, 2022 might not be. So anyway, there's just a lot of questions that are surfacing right now. And we haven't even gotten to all the things that Elon Musk and Doge have dug up, but we've got a second hour to get into some of that as well. So let's take a break. But if you find yourself saying, I'd like to know a little bit more about what Reggie Littlejohn is doing, that's our first article on the website. My Viewpoints commentary is there. When we come back, we're going to spend some time talking about a lot of issues that unfolded over the weekend. All that coming up right after this.
Do you know anyone who would appreciate a news source that is anchored to God's Word and not to a political party? Do you know someone who wishes they could hear today's most confusing questions addressed with biblical clarity? Do you know anyone who wishes they felt equipped to make a difference in this nation? Well, here's the good news. Point of View is anchored to God's Word above all else. Point of View tackles every issue of the day from a biblical perspective. Point of View equips Americans to take action. And you can bring Point of View to more listeners. Make a difference today by joining Point of View's Truth Team. We'll start our official Truth Team campaign in a couple of weeks, but you can join right now at pointofview.net or by calling us toll-free at 1-800-347-5151. Again, join the Truth Team at pointofview.net or 1-800-347-5151. 51. Make a difference today. Point of View will continue after this.
I do appreciate Point of View and what you folks are doing. You really are doing a great job to educate and to help Christian folks do a better job to honor Christ in all that we do.
My husband and I are your supporters. We just really appreciate the show and the people you bring on.
I just want to commend you guys on your program. I love listening to you. It's a blessing. Been listening to you for several years. Your program has helped my family see current events and elections and politics through the eyes and the principles of Scripture. And that's been enlightening, and we're trying to pass that on to others.
I want to say, first of all, that I really enjoyed the Millennial Roundtable, and I love the program altogether. I think Kerby is great, and I really appreciate all of y'all, all that y'all do, and the truth that y'all put out.
Hey, great show. Love all your comments and what you're talking about.
Thanks again for what you do.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour, let's see if we can focus some time and attention on a couple of issues in the news, all starting with the letter D. First, Doge, then deportation. That probably will take us for about a half an hour, and then we'll get into some other topics that are certainly relevant as well. When you talk about Doge, right now, the center of focus has been on the Department of Education. So our next article that you can read comes from the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal, which I was surprised. I know that they probably know that the bureaucracy hasn't been that helpful, but again, there is always a tendency for one institution to support another institution. So to have an editorial from the Wall Street Journal that says, "Don't cry for the education department," I thought, well, maybe they're making some progress here. Over the weekend, some of you that might have watched Bill Maher, and you can decide whether you want to or not, although, again, one of the guests he had on the program is somebody I've quoted recently and actually surprised him with some of her comments that as a liberal, she supports many of the things Donald Trump is doing. He didn't see that coming. But nevertheless, when they came to the Department of Education, he says, you know, I'm a little bit ambivalent about that. And I thought, that's very interesting, because as the editors, and I want to quote from them, said, Republicans have been calling to raise or to take down the U.S. Department of Education essentially since Jimmy Carter opened the doors in 1980, and President Trump is now actually trying to do it. The 1,300 layoffs that were announced last Tuesday have reduced the size and scope of the Department of Education by about half. And so they are critical of the blunderbuss way in which Trump does it. They had to get at least one shot in on Donald Trump. I knew that would happen. But nevertheless, they point out that Education Secretary Linda McMahon told the Senate during her confirmation hearings that her department was set up by Congress and clearly cannot be shut down without it. And that is true. A lot of people said, well, you can't really get rid of the department, and if you can't get the requisite number of votes to end it, you can certainly starve it, and that's another way of going about that. The concern that I think all of us have had about the so-called deep state, and I've got a deep state booklet we made available to you, the administrative state, as Vivek Ramaswamy refers to it as, or the swamp, as so many people call it, is that it's almost impossible to shut down any government program, any government agency. There is always the issue of goal succession, something else is done. And of course, let's recognize that there was a time when education had a cabinet level. It was the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, but it was Jimmy Carter really as a payoff to the National Education Association, the NEA teachers union, to actually create a separate Department of Education. And that has existed since 1980, and there was a real desire under Ronald Reagan to do so, but his first Secretary of Education was Bill Bennett. Everybody liked Bill Bennett. Everybody thought, well, maybe Bill Bennett can bring some things to the program. Did. As a matter of fact, I remember doing some face-to-face interviews with him on some very good ideas that he had proposed to improve education. The Undersecretary of State at that time was Gary Bauer. You know who he is. Everybody liked him. He ended up, of course, being the individual looking at domestic policy the rest of that 8 years for Ronald Reagan, but nevertheless, that is the case. And so, again, the editors remind us that when Jimmy Carter signed the bill, he argued that elevating education to a cabinet post, separate from the old Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, would eliminate unnecessary bureaucracy, cut red tape, and promote better service to local school systems. It would even save tax dollars. The editors add this little line, feel free to pause until the laughter is subsiding. That has not been the case. 5 decades later, the Education Department runs a student loan boondoggle, and it is a boondoggle with $1.6 trillion portfolio, while also harassing schools, states, and districts with progressive diktats or policies, if you will, on everything from transgender bathrooms to the use of COVID-19 mask rules. When the Education Department hasn't done, and what it has not done, is to improve academic performance of American students. The real action is in the states, including, of course, school choice, which has a proven record. But nevertheless, the argument is that at least we could pass out these dollars that come from the Department of Education without strings, cutting federal regulations and allowing the states and the local communities, which are closer to the issue, to actually make wiser decisions about how to spend those funds. The better way is to keep the money in the states and in the communities in the first place. Don't send them to the Department of Education, having all sorts of money spent on bureaucracies and bureaucrats and regulations and the rest, and have a percentage of that money then eventually trickle down and back to the states. So again, the argument they're making is the Republican Party has a political opportunity to focus on improving school performance, expanding choice for families, and holding districts accountable for results. And that is certainly the case. Let's see if indeed that is the case. And they point out that the closer President Trump can get to shutting off the lights at the Education Department, the better. But then he'd best have an answer to voters who want to know what's next to help children get a better education. There have been attempts to try to work with the Department of Education. No Child Left Behind, of course, was one of the ideas under George W. Bush. How's that working out for you? And if you've listened to this program or looked at almost any of my commentaries over the last couple of months, including the one that I posted just recently by our friend Larry Sand, that one which is came out on Friday, Uncivil Education, just reminds us again that the recent educational report, what oftentimes is referred to as America's Scorecard, showed that only a significant number and a rather dwindling number of fourth graders and eighth graders can actually read. And so they're not really good at reading, but they're really good at Karl Marx. Because, as I pointed out in that commentary, at least a fourth, 25% of Americans' classrooms use the Marxist book written by Howard Zinn, known as A People's History of the United States. And in my commentary, I point out that we've even had Mary Grabar on the program because she wrote this very good book on debunking Howard Zinn, and even have a link to the hour-long interview we did with her. So if your children or grandchildren are learning about American history through a Marxist perspective in this book, A People's History of the United States, maybe we need to try something else. And more importantly, we might even put up with some of the ideology along the way if we just had children that could read and write, could think, and used any kind of critical thinking skills. And that's not what we're doing right now. No wonder so many parents are thinking about homeschool. Christian schools, looking for charter schools and the rest, because indeed education has not flourished when we've had a separate Department of Education. If you'd like to know a little bit more, it's our second article on the website. We'll come back and talk about some other DOGE issues right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Earlier this month, President Trump signed an executive order that establishes a strategic Bitcoin reserve. It will capitalize the Bitcoin already owned by the Department of Treasury that was taken from criminal or civil asset forfeiture proceedings. It will not sell any Bitcoin, and the Secretaries of Treasury and Commerce have been given the task of developing budget-neutral strategies for acquiring more. At the same time, the executive order also establishes a digital asset stockpile that would consist of other digital assets owned by the Department of Treasury. There are no plans to acquire any more, and likely those will be sold off. As you might imagine, there are proponents and opponents to the strategic Bitcoin reserve. Many members of Trump's cabinet are proponents of Bitcoin and have Bitcoin within their financial portfolios. The executive order reminds voters of the pledge by candidate Trump to make the U.S. the crypto capital of the world. The opponents can be divided into two groups. One group opposes a Bitcoin strategic reserve because they believe it won't work. I first discussed Bitcoin on radio in 2017, and for the last 8 years I've read and heard what is often called FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. We'll no doubt hear all those erroneous claims once again. The opponents are those who believe the strategic reserve will work and don't want to reward bad behavior. This asset, with a fixed supply of 21 million coins, will increase in value and can be used to offset our current and future national debt. The debt came from politicians who ran up massive deficits and the Federal Reserve that printed the money to fund this fiscal irresponsibility. Some people in the past feared the government might ban Bitcoin. Instead, the government will be acquiring Bitcoin. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view of genetic engineering, go to viewpoints.info/genetic engineering. Viewpoints.info/genetic engineering. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
We talked about DOGE. We're going to get to deportation in just a minute, but I thought I'd just make a real quick comment, and that is that there are a number of evangelical groups that we've had on this program who are upset about the fact that there have been some cuts in foreign aid. Now, part of that goes back to when you're trying to do things quickly, sooner or later something is going to break, and this has to do with the fact that there were some funds that were going to be available to the National Association of Evangelicals, which is World Relief. And you might remember, if you listen to this program, that we've had Matthew Sorens on this program talking about World Relief, and they received a stop work order in January. It wasn't really canceled, but it's difficult for them to know what they're going to do in the future. Matthew Sorens, who's been on the program, said it's difficult to operate until we're convinced and confident that we'll be reimbursed. First of all, next time we have him on, I might say, I didn't know you were using funds from USAID. Okay, that was news to me because I assumed that was funds in the humanitarian arm of the National Association of Evangelicals, that those of us that gave money went to that. Another individual that was part of this prayer vigil was Eugene Cho. He's been on the program at least 3 times. He is a pastor, but also CEO of the group Bread for the World, in which he was denouncing what he called broad, untargeted cuts implemented by, again, the USAID. So, again, I think it is worth mentioning that evangelicals sometimes have been upset about this, and so some of those Christian groups gathered together back about 6 days ago, and maybe in the future we'll get them on the program to talk about some of the concerns. As you may have heard me say before, Elon Musk has been quite willing to admit on more than one occasion, we will make a mistake. When we make a mistake, you can hold us accountable, and we'll try to fix it. And so I think that's about all you can ask when there is an attempt to move so quickly. And you might say, well, why are they moving so quickly? Because that's another criticism I've heard people making. Well, if you've seen the pushback, you can see why they wanted to move quickly, because it just gives the other side, which is not willing to cut even a small amount. And you've heard me talk on this program about the number of cuts. The biggest cut so far has been the Department of Education, 50% of the personnel. But in most of these others, whether it's the FAA or the Department of Homeland Security, we're talking about a fraction of a percent of individuals that have actually either taken early retirement or have been let go. So this is insignificant in terms of the massive budget. And for anybody that's upset with Elon Musk, and there are a lot of people that are, they're pounding on their Tesla cars and they're shooting into some of these Tesla dealerships, and they're setting fire to some of these electric charging stations and all that. You've got to realize that don't blame Elon Musk. You might blame everybody that has built a government, which, even though we are going to this year bring in $5 trillion. Are you understanding how much $5 trillion is? $5 trillion is $5,000 billion. $5 trillion we're bringing in to the federal revenue of the U.S. Treasury. And $5 trillion is not enough to keep all of the programs fully funded, because of mostly what was happening in the last 4 administrations, but especially the last administration. You have a budget right now of $7 trillion. I think $5 trillion should be enough for the federal government, but it's going to take a lot more work than what Elon Musk has been able to do to cut that, because some of those cuts are going to have to be in things like defense, health delivery, which also includes entitlements like security, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and the rest. And that is probably almost untouchable. And it just illustrates again that the reaction, the overreaction to some of this is really inappropriate when you start looking at the few people involved compared to the mass of individuals in the federal government and the few dollars involved when you're looking at, again, a $7 trillion expenditure that comes every fiscal year. And so they will be spending that up to September 30th. And it just, again, it's mind-boggling, given the fact that just a few years ago, the budget for the federal government was $4 trillion. We're bringing in $5 trillion, but unfortunately, we're spending $7 trillion. And obviously, we can't continue to do that. Okay, let's get to deportation. The big issue, interestingly enough, has been the deportation of these illegal criminal gangs. If you're not familiar, we have posted an article, and this article is one that is relatively critical of Donald Trump and relatively supportive of a decision made by one judge. And again, it's one judge, U.S. District Judge James Boasberg, who actually said that as you were taking these individuals, these are criminal gang members, they were actually shipped from here to El Salvador, even though many of the gang members are from Venezuela, but they were shipped to El Salvador because the president of El Salvador, President Bukele. By the way, we're going to be talking about Bitcoin in just a minute. He has a Bitcoin standard in his country. But anyway, President Bukele has been putting his own gang members in these prisons. And I'm talking about hardened prisons for gang members, criminal gang members. These are not the prisons where the guards come and tuck you in at night, where they leave a little pillow, maybe a mint on your pillow. This is where, if you've seen some of the pictures, pretty amazing. But nevertheless, this has been a choice that was made by the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and also, I think, indirectly, Tom Homan, who is the director, if you will, or the czar of the border, and most importantly, by Donald Trump. And Secretary of State Marco Rubio actually negotiated this deal with President Bukele in El Salvador and said, we sent over 250 alien enemy members of Tren de Aragua, which El Salvador was agreed to hold in their jails. But in addition to that, there were some others that were pulled, some of these other Venezuelan gangs, and even some of those that are from the Mexican cartels. And that was considered to be inappropriate because the president, Donald Trump, used what was called the Alien Enemies Act, which was implemented all the way back in 1798. Now, it has been used in World War I, has been used in World War II, but it hasn't been used in a long time. And so that is what led to this particular judge in the D.C. Circuit Court to actually call for a halt, and not only said that we want to pause sending these criminal gang members to El Salvador, but I want the plane to turn around, which I thought was pretty strong kind of comments. The argument made by the press secretary and others is, well, the plane, when this particular edict was issued by one justice or judge, was actually in international space, so it was no longer under the jurisdiction of the United States. So what we have right now are some individuals saying, well, what can we do to turn this around? Some are talking about getting a writ of mandamus. I noticed that Congressman Brandon Gill, who is a member of Congress from the Fort Worth area, and I'm pretty sure, isn't he the son-in-law of Dinesh D'Souza, has actually decided to file articles of impeachment against Judge Boasberg. So we'll see where this goes. But nevertheless, I think most Americans would say taking hundreds of illegal criminal gang members and sending them out of the country and then housing them instead in the country prisons in El Salvador with all sorts of other gang members would be a good idea. But nevertheless, that's the latest controversy about that as well. We come back from the break. I'll real quickly talk about Mahmoud Kahil, because that is an individual that they're talking about wanting to deport because he's here on a visa. Actually, just withdraw his visa. Doesn't even have to be deported. If he no longer has a visa, he no longer be in this country. And that was what led to some of the protests that ended up in the Trump Tower just the other day. So we'll get into that one. It's not quite deportation, but it sort of fits in that general category. And then we'll get into some other issues as well, because we certainly have lots of things to talk about here today on Point of View. And I don't think that they're going to diminish anytime soon. If you find yourself saying, okay, I would like to read a little bit more about this, I've tried to be fair. This article by Nicholas Riccardi actually appeared in Real Clear Politics, tends to disagree with the Trump administration, give, if you will, sort of the other side. So you can read about that, and you can get some perspective, both pro and con, on this latest flap about deportation of criminal gang members. I'm glad to see him go. Love to know your thoughts. We'll be right back.
In 19th century London, two towering historical figures did battle, not with guns and bombs, but words and ideas. London was home to Karl Marx, the father of communism, and legendary Baptist preacher Charles Spurgeon. London was in many ways the center of the world, economically, militarily, and intellectually. Mark sought to destroy religion, the family, and everything the Bible supports. Spurgeon stood against him, warning of socialism's dangers. Spurgeon understood Christianity is not just religious truth, it is truth for all of life. Where do you find men with that kind of wisdom to stand against darkness today? Get the light you need on today's most pressing issues delivered to your inbox when you sign up for the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Every weekday, in less than 2 minutes, you'll learn how to be a person of light to stand against darkness in our time. It's free, so visit pointofview.net/signup right now. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, let me, as a program note, mention that tomorrow we're going to be spending some time talking with Junie Henderson. She has written this book, When the Light Finds Us. She was a woman, a mother, who was trying to raise her children while she was in prison. Now, again, we recognize that people sometimes end up in prison for all sorts of reasons. They make a bad mistake, they were involved in a criminal enterprise, whatever it might be, due to either mistakes they made or others made around them, and they find themselves in prison. We also want to do what we can to have a ministry in prison, so we'll be talking about that with her tomorrow. I think you'll find that powerful story, one that has actually made its way to the mainstream media. I think there's an article we've got there from CNN and some others about that, and so then we'll get back into some issues in the news. Let me also, for those of you watching online, hold up some of these booklets. These are the booklets I was just showing a while back to Reggie Littlejohn, and she said, "Oh, these are so good. I need these kind of booklets," because she says, I'm a lawyer and I write these long treatises and then I find nobody reads them. So really you have to come up with something that's maybe 2 pages of summary and realistically more 1 page. And I said, yeah, that's why I think people love these booklets so much. I've got this one on artificial intelligence we were talking about with her, privacy and surveillance, digital surveillance. We talked about globalism a little bit off the air with her. We talked about the Great Reset, censorship, the deep state. Those are just a few I pulled out of our more than 70 of these booklets. And one of the reasons why I would encourage you to join with us next week when we have our Truth Team Week. It's got the theme of Anchored to Truth. You can go to the website right now and find out a little bit more. We do bring this opportunity for you to support this ministry, but one of the many benefits, of course, we send the Outlook magazine. I held up earlier the one on China, which is March, and I've already received now the one in for April to be going out shortly. These are great resources you receive for your donation, but if you give as little as $1 a day, $30 a month or more, you become part of the Truth Team. And what happens is you also not only receive the Outlook magazine, you receive these booklets. And I just cannot tell you, as a matter of fact, she wanted to walk out with all sorts of booklets here because she could see very quickly how she could use those in her ministry. And I think she was excited about the fact that even as she looked at that, says, you're even doing a biblical point of view on some of these issues. And that's something that even though I know she has a husband that has been in the ministry, that's not something she's focused on and probably would be time-consuming for her to try to put together, and I could see her wanting to get some of those as well. I guess I should have just said, hey, you could be a member of the Truth Team, and then you receive them automatically, but she wants to get some of the ones we've already written. So nevertheless, just another reminder that next week we'll be bringing some great programs to you. One of those, which I'm looking forward to, relates to our conversation about China, and that is next week we have Joel Rosenberg, and his latest novel deals with China and the relationship between China and Israel. I think you will find that fascinating, and so we're going to talk about that on Wednesday. I'm going to do that, bringing some of the material from the book by Tom Cotton and also by Gordon Chang, but then a week later we'll be talking about China again because we'll have our good friend Joel Rosenberg, and we have a variety of other individuals that will be joining us throughout the week. But let's get back to, this isn't really deportation, but it's similar, and that is, you remember that we talked about the fact that this protest at the Trump Tower had to do with the detention of Mahmoud Khalili. And Khalil is actually how you should say his name. And he is here, came to the United States on a student visa. He's actually an Algerian citizen who grew up in Syria and Palestine. I'm going to talk about Syria in just a minute. And his offense, which I think is significant, is that he has been part of and a major leader and spokesman for the Columbia University Apartheid Divest Group. Now, the argument people have said is, well, doesn't he have free speech? And the answer is yes, he has free speech. He has free speech to actually denounce Israel if he wants. wants. He has free speech to call for the disinvestment of Columbia University or any university from Israel. But he doesn't have the right to break things or hurt people. So sometimes what you hear is, well, this man is going to be removed from this country because he has no longer free speech. And even if you're not a citizen of the United States, you do have free speech. But here's the issue. Your actions have consequences. And so, yes, he can talk about the fact that October 7th was a wonderful event, because if you go to the website, they talk about the fact that October 7th was a glorious occasion. But you then come to the other part of his story. And don't take my word for it. Let's go to the president of Barnard College, which is the sister campus of Columbia University. And the president reminded us that he has caused over $30,000 in damage in vandalism at the Columbia and Barnard campuses. And on 2 occasions, because of his leadership, these individuals who are pro-Hamas have forcefully entered the halls of the university campus and refused to leave. So the question is, does he have a right as a resident, even though he's here as on a student visa, does he have a right to speak on whatever he wants to speak on? He does. But does the State Department have a right to consider whether to issue a renewal of his visa or whether they have the right to cancel his visa on what he has actually done? Then they have a right to do that as well. And Marco Rubio made it very clear. He says, look, we issue thousands of visas to all sorts of people who say all sorts of things, and that's perfectly fine. Whether it's obnoxious or obscene, whatever they want to say under the First Amendment, because our course of rules, those residing in the United States have the same rights of free speech as Americans. However, you knew we were going to get to the however. However, we don't have to let people in the United States automatically. We can make a decision on whether we feel they're in the interest of the United States or whether they pose a danger to the United States. And on numerous occasions, the groups under Mr. Khalil have supported groups that have committed vandalism, have harassed Jews, and most importantly, have called for the destruction of Western civilization and glorified a group that is designated by the U.S. State Department as what? A terrorist group. So I don't want people to confuse or conflate free speech with acts of vandalism. These are 2 different issues. And that's why they are looking seriously as to whether or not to actually cancel his visa. And the argument is, well, because he married an American citizen, well, then that should be enough to keep him here. Not necessarily. So we'll see where this goes, but I just thought it would give you a little bit of a history on that. And while we're talking about Syria, my last article here is by our good friend Jerry Newcomb. I was with him just the other day, the National Religious Broadcasters. And as you might remember, we talked about the fact that about 1,300 Christians in Syria have been killed, and he points out that Christians being killed is nothing new, but the intense nature of this prosecution of Christians in places like Nigeria and now Syria are of great concern. And then he points out an interesting irony, because this persecution of Christians in Syria is taking place in a country that historically has been very important in the Christian faith. I think we'll talk about this when we have our trip to Greece, May 17th to the 27th, because if you think about it, the first time Christians or any believers in Jesus were called Christians was in Antioch, Syria. Paul's conversion, he was known, as you know, of Saul of Tarsus, took place in what? Syria. He talks about the fact that the missionary journey of Paul and Barnabas that changed the world, that first missionary journey was launched from Antioch, Syria. And one of the chief companions with Paul on his missionary journeys was a doctor by the name of Luke. And he was the author of the gospel that bears his name, and also, of course, is the author of the Acts of the Apostles. And Luke was from where? Well, he was from Antioch, Syria. So it is, I think, ironic and perhaps even tragic that at a place which has so much meaning to Christians, it certainly is a time in which we reflect on those who become martyrs. And later on in his article, he reminds us that Jesus told his disciples that they were to be his witnesses. Of course, you see that in Matthew 28, also in Acts 1:8. And the Greek word which we translate witness is the word from which we get the word martyr. And so in some respects, we can understand that sometimes in being a witness, you end up being a martyr. We will, as we always do, spend some time in the future talking with our good friends of Voice of the Martyrs and Open Doors, but I just thought you might be interested in seeing that interesting connection between Christians in Syria and Syria in the history of Christianity. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and certainly one of the things you've heard me talk about so often is the need for us to have discernment and to be skeptical and to maybe check things out, not always believe the first thing you hear. And this article, it's our fourth article by Noah Rothman, is entitled, "They Think We're Stupid, the Bipartisan Habit of Patronizing the Public." By the way, I do have to put bipartisan bipartisan in quotes, because in order to make it look bipartisan, you go through 3.5 pages, and he's given one example after another of Democrat leaders doing that. And then he comes to one at the end where he talks about how Republicans have borrowed some of these ideas from the left in terms of how they've identified Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And I'm thinking that's a bit of a stretch, but I know he wants to try to make it look bipartisan so it doesn't look like he's just beating up on the Democratic Party. But that's where most of the examples in 3.5 pages out of his 4 pages come from. And one of those is probably well known. So let's start with the easy one. And that's where Chuck Schumer, Senate Minority Leader, is on with Kristen Welker of NBC News. And this was about the whole issue about whether or not President Biden was mentally fit. And back in February 2024, which again was more than a year ago, at that time, Chuck Schumer said all of these comments about him being an elderly man with a poor memory are a right-wing propaganda that has mental acuity is really wrong. And so again, when he came back on this last year, when of course President Biden stepped down, she said, well, don't you feel as though you have misled the American people about President Biden's mental acuity? And this so bothered Chuck Schumer, he said, look, we didn't. And of course, then, as Noah Rothman points out, oh, yes, we did. We all saw that. We read that. We saw many times in which people were attributing any concern about the mental fitness of President Biden this time a year ago to be nothing more than a right-wing propaganda stunt. And so one of the questions that Noah Rothman asks is, why would Chuck Schumer invest his credibility in such an obvious dead stock? Because even when Democrats in the press were promulgating the flimsy cover story, more than 6 out of 10 Americans told NBC News pollsters that Biden lacked the necessary mental and physical health to be president for a second term. Does Schumer think we're just idiots? No, maybe not, but he thinks maybe we're stupid, or thinks he can get away with it because the compliant press has been so good at that so often. And he goes on, Noah Rothman says, the Democrats' assumption that we're all inordinately gullible should explain why the party so frequently tries to convince Americans to ignore the evidence of their own eyes. He gives another example, and this one we talked about this time last year as well, in which when we started seeing the price of meat going up, the price of all sorts of groceries going up, the answer was very quick. Senator Elizabeth Warren said, quote, meat-packing monopolies that are using inflation as a cover to raise prices and make record profits. Then later on, it got worse. Grocery store chains force high food prices onto American families while rewarding executives and investors with lavish bonuses and stock buybacks. And this is what happens when only a handful, she says, of giant grocery store chains dominate the market. We need to strengthen our antitrust laws to break up giant corporations and lower prices. At the time, I gave you the numbers, and they were very easy to show. This one takes you into it as well. There are no grocery store monopolies, and the average grocery store, as I reported at the time, and it talks about it again in this article, gets a whopping 1.6% profit margin after taxes in 2023, which is up 1% from 2019. In other words, it isn't exactly the most profitable venture you can go into, and we've talked about this before. Well, then we talk about, of course, the issue of inflation, the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan. You had The Economist, the former Treasury Secretary from the past, Larry Summers, who was also the president of Harvard, warning that this could have consequences for the dollar and financial stability. It could increase inflation, and of course, as it did. And so you had all the attempts to try to cover that. And then finally, when you had one professor, University of Michigan, claiming in August of 2022 that we had zero inflation, immediately Karine Jean-Pierre, Joe Biden, and everybody said, see, prices didn't go up. No, it's 1% that didn't increase from the previous ones, but all the others did indeed go up. And all it was simply saying is inflation rose at a slower pace. But he points out consumers understood that inflation is cumulative. They were feeling that because over that entire year was an 8.5% increase. And again, that's just the CPI, which I think is actually very erroneous. And so he goes through literally 3.5 pages of examples. I've given you more than you probably needed. So he does come to the point where he says, well, Republicans have actually borrowed from the left, because when they talk about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., they want to sometimes make us believe that if Robert F. Kennedy was not the Secretary of Health and Human Services, we as a country would subsist on a diet of Cheez-Its and Captain Crunch, and as a result would allow pharmaceutical companies to continue to advertise on television and all the rest. And so that's probably true, but not even close to the outright lying to the camera face that has come time and time again. And the theory that he has is this: they think we're stupid. His last comment is this: those who think they can work you like a marionette are possessed of an abiding belief that they are a better class of operator, smarter, cleverer, more intellectually nimble than the average American. And the reinforcement of this view from their allies on social media was, for reasons that are entirely elusive, they seem to believe they have sorted themselves into America's society's upper caste. So the elites think that they're smarter than you. They think that they can manipulate you. They think that they can actually look into a camera and lie to you. And as a result, that's why I think we're going to have to exercise even more discernment. The good news is they're getting called out on the social media. Sometimes, as I just pointed out, they're getting called on the legacy media, and that's a good thing. But even when they're not, check it out. It may not be true. They may have told you with great conviction that they're right and you're wrong. And guess what? We found out many times they were wrong and we were right. Might just mention my commentary today is on the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve. If you don't know much about it, it's kind of a good summary. I don't think that's going to happen on the federal government level quite yet. I think it's probably going to happen more at the state level. And that's an easy prediction to make because the other day, the Texas Senate passed the Texas Bitcoin Reserve, Senate Bill 21. So it's passed the Senate, now goes to the House. I think the House is going to pass it, and I'm virtually certain that Greg Abbott, the governor, is going to sign it. So the first Bitcoin reserve might be a state reserve, but over time, maybe we have a strategic Bitcoin reserve at the national level. As I point out, that may be a way to offset the tremendous amount of debt that we as a country have incurred. We'll talk more about that as the week unfolds. Most importantly, I want to thank Megan for her help with her ability to pull all of this together. Don't forget, of course, we have the Point of View Spotify highlights that we have on there as well, the Point of View highlights on Spotify. Also want to thank Steve for help producing the program. Most importantly, we look forward to seeing you tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Do you know anyone who would appreciate a news source that is anchored to God's Word and not to a political party? Do you know someone who wishes they could hear today's most confusing questions addressed with biblical clarity? Do you know anyone who wishes they felt equipped to make a difference in this nation? Well, here's the good news. Point of View is anchored to God's Word above all else. Point of View tackles every issue of the day from a biblical perspective. Point of View equips Americans to take action. And you can bring Point of View to more listeners, make a difference today by joining Point of View's Truth Team. We'll start our official Truth Team campaign in a couple of weeks, but you can join right now at pointofview.net or by calling us toll-free at 1-800-347-5151. Again, join the Truth Team at pointofview.net or 1-800-347-5151. 51. Make a difference today. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just wanted to tell you, too, how much I have appreciated Point of View over the years. I've always been taught that we take care of our own, and I feel like Point of View is one of our own because of the Christian worldview that you do promote. And so I have become a partner today, and I just want to thank you so much, and just God bless you for all that you do.
Listen, I wanted to make a quick comment. I'm a relatively new listener to the show, and I really kind of stumbled upon it more than anything because I'm doing some driving now that I wasn't in the past. And my comment really is, I think you guys and gals are more right on about the assessment of this country right now than anything I've heard. You know, I go home and I tell my wife, you've got to hear what they're talking about on the show. It's just so right on. And I tell my parents the same thing.
I'm 25 years old, and I started listening to Point of View about 4 years ago, and it has changed the way that I think and the way that I view the world around me.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.